Welcome back to the FantasyPros YouTube channel. My name is Derek Brown. In today's video, we're going to run through 8 players that you and FantasyPros ECR need to be higher on. Before we get to these 8 players for today's video, got to talk to you again. Head to FantasyPros.com. All the analysis we're going to discuss here today is found in the primer, my weekly love letter to help you get all of the wins in fantasy football. Let's dive in. All right, first player we got to get to on the list, and I know it's a name that everybody's dreading to talk about and discuss because we've been let down this season, and that's CJ Stroud. He is QB 15 right now in ECR at FantasyPros.com right now, and I understand it's been rough, people. QB 25 in fantasy points per game. That's right, QB 25 for the season. He has finished as a QB1 in weekly scoring since week 4. So I understand the trepidation and you're saying, no way, not doing it. But I'm telling you to go back to the well this week. CJ Stroud's getting back his best weapon, arguably, in Nico Collins. And he has a wonderful, wonderful matchup this week. We're looking at a Tennessee Titans pass defense that since week 7 has allowed the 4th most passing touchdowns and the 7th highest success rate per dropback. And you're saying, okay, but Derek, what about the Houston offensive line? It's been abysmal. Yes, it has been. Tennessee has the 10th lowest pressure rate this year. So CJ Stroud, weapons are getting healthier, great matchup, and he should have clean pockets. He's going to be a QB1 this week. Get him into your lineups. Okay, next player we got to discuss here on the list. We're going to go to the running back position. We're going to talk about Bucky Irving, who barely squeaks in. Outside of the top 20 running backs, he's RB21 in ECR. I think he could finish as a top 15 back, maybe an RB1. We could see a Buccaneers offense that just says, okay, look, I know Mike Evans is back, but let's run the ball, and the Giants are going to allow us to do that. Bucky Irving's been awesome, too. Since week 7, the RB24 in fantasy points per game. He's averaging almost 14 touches, a little bit over 70 total yards per game. If the Bucs get up early, they could just choose to ride Irving the entire second half. And the Giants, they have not been able to stop anybody on the ground. So Irving could be headed for a monster day. Since week 6, New York Giants rushing defense has allowed the highest explosive run rate in the NFL and the most rushing yards per game. Bucky Irving is a strong RB2, could be an RB1 in week 12. All right, staying on the running back position here, got to talk about Javonte Williams, RB26 in ECR. And I understand we all got flummoxed, we all got bamboozled. I was there. I'm with you. But Audric Estime last week, and I know I'm asking for pain here. Going back to the well, the Denver backfield, but I'm doing it because the matchup is right. Javonte Williams last week, he was the workhorse, and I think the blowout nature of that game kind of is leaving a little bit to be desired as far as when you look at his snap rate and the volume and all that kind of stuff. In the first 3 quarters of that game, he played 64% of the snaps overall and 85% of the snaps when the team got into the red zone. So this is still his backfield outside of any Sean Payton quotes. We also want to be kind of rewind. What did Javonte do versus this run defense last time he faced him? 18 touches and 111 total yards. Javonte Williams is going to be a strong RB2 this week. I know there's risk and I know there's worry. You need to embrace both and get them into your lineup. Okay, moving over to the wide receiver position. I know none of us have known what to do with the Chicago Bears passing attack for the entire season. I'm telling you to invest in Odunze and play him in your lineups for week 12. We're looking at Odunze currently in ECR, wide receiver 34. And Rome last week, he led the way. 32.3% target share. 53.6% air yard share. This man had almost a 33% first read share. And I know I've talked about that a few different times on the primer since Chicago's returned from the bye. Rome's led the way in a few different weeks in first read share. So Caleb's been leaning on him. So we look at the matchup. Since week 6, the Vikings have been giving it up to outside wide receivers, allowing the 12th most fantasy points per game, the 6th most receiving yards to boundary wide receivers. Odunze could lead the way for Chicago. If Caleb has a great day this week, Odunze is going to be a huge part of it. Get him into your lineups. All right, before we get to the top 4 of this list, if you are juggling multiple fantasy football teams and feeling just a tad bit overwhelmed, FantasyPros is here to help you simplify things. With the FantasyPros Multi-League Assistant, you can see all the latest news, notes, and rankings for every single player across all of your teams in one spot. And this makes your path to victory clearer and easier. Dive in and let us help you dominate all of your leagues with the multi-league assistant right now at fantasypros.com/myplaybook or on the Fantasy Football My Playbook app. Download it today. All right, breaking into the top 4 players on this list. I got to talk about my mans, got to talk about him again, and I know people are tired of hearing the name, but we've got to discuss Jalen Coker. I know we got so many teams on a bye, and we're all desperately looking for wide receiver 3s and flex plays for lineups this week. Jalen Coker needs to be heavily in this discussion. And yes, I know Bryce Young is still the quarterback for Carolina. I'm not in love with it either, people. But the matchup is right for Coker, and he got volume right before the bye, and I think he's going to continue to get it again, even if Adam Thielen returns this week. We look at the last game before the bye for Jalen Coker. He had a 32% target share, a 36.4 first read share. Those are alpha level numbers. And I know the stats didn't correlate. I get it. Only 63% of his targets were deemed catchable. Hopefully we get better target quality from Bryce Young this week. But if that happens, Coker's set up nicely here. Kansas City has struggled to defend slot wide receivers. This has been the case for most of the season. Since week 6, they have allowed the 2nd most fantasy points per game to opposing slot wide receivers and the 4th most receiving yards per game. So while you might be tired of hearing the name Jalen Coker, you won't be tired of the fantasy points he's going to produce for you in week 12. Okay, staying in the same game and in a player we've not discussed on this video at all throughout the entirety of the season, maybe once. I have to go back and look. But I'm telling you to have confidence in playing Xavier Worthy. And this is not just box score chasing, fantasy point chasing for last week. What we saw out of Worthy last week was, okay, Andy Reid's still kind of going through the parts and pieces of this offense and figuring out how all of these chess pieces fit moving forward for Kansas City. And we saw Worthy's role change. Looked a lot more similar to the role that he got right after Rashee Rice was out for the season, as opposed to the MVS and running clearouts role that he inherited 2 to 3 weeks we've seen after the DeAndre Hopkins acquisition. Worthy last week, 15.2% target share. He had a 22% first read share. And so him being involved that heavily as a first read for Patrick Mahomes is a difference. And if we're looking at the matchup for Carolina, they've allowed the 14th most receiving yards per game since week 6, so the matchup is good. And if Patrick Mahomes does decide to go deep this week, Worthy should be the target, and he should decide to sit here and dial up the deep ball this week. Carolina has allowed the 6th highest passer rating to deep passing and the 5th highest adjusted completion rate to deep targets. So, Patrick Mahomes wants to light it up. And I know this is a good matchup for the ground game, but if Mahomes wants to get right in this passing attack, not only are we going to see a heavy dose of Travis Kelce this week, we're going to see a lot of Xavier Worthy. All right, breaking into the top 2 players for this week. Again, staying in this game because I think there's going to be a lot of points scored. Going back to the Carolina side of this Kansas City and Carolina Panthers matchup, got to talk about Ja'Tavion Sanders. Tight end 19 in ECR, and I'm telling you he's a top 15 option. Probably going to be a tight end 1 this week. The matchup is great for Ja'Tavion Sanders. Kansas City, we know, has been giving up all types of production to tight ends. The most receiving yards per game allowed of the position, as well as the 5th most fantasy points per game allowed of the position. But also the coverage matchup is great for Ja'Tavion Sanders. For a player that, since week 6, had almost a 15% target share, 2.14 yards per route run, JT Sanders, if you're struggling with a lot of options to possibly play a tight end this week, like you got nobody that you're feeling great about, and you need ceiling for your lineup, JT Sanders can give you that this week. All right, to the number 1 player on this week's list, we got to mention here, and I'm going down the list, far down the list. Wide receiver 55 in ECR right now, we got to talk about Devaughn Vele. And yes, Bo Nix has been playing really, really good football. Extremely good football. Devaughn Vele is going to be a huge part of the passing attack and how they attack the Raiders this week. For a secondary that since week 7 has moved to the 4th highest too high rate in the NFL. And this matters because since week 5, Vele against too high, 3.44 yards per route run. He has almost an 18% first read share against too high, as well as the Raiders cannot stop slot wide receivers. Since week 6, the Las Vegas Raiders are allowing let me correct my numbers here. They are allowing the most fantasy points per game. The Las Vegas Raiders, 2 slot wide receivers, as well as the 6th most receiving yards per game to the position. Devaughn Vele might be far down the list than ECR, and it might not be a name you're comfortable in a lot of different weeks plugging into your wide receiver 3 or flex spot. I'm telling you, you have to play him this week. All right, everyone, that's the top 8 players we got to talk about for week 12. You need to be getting into your lineups for wide receiver 3s, for flex plays. All this great analysis can be found in the primer on FantasyPros.com, as well as use the multi-league assistant. Help us help you dominate all of your leagues. I will see you in week 13.